There are so many bosses throughout the entire Legend of Zelda franchise. There are mini bosses, there are dungeon bosses, there are final bosses. And I've been thinking recently about what makes a boss fight stand out to me and what my favorites are out of the entire franchise. Now, I have played Link Between Worlds, Minish Cap, and Wind Waker, but it's been a really long time since I've played all of them, and so I don't remember I don't remember anything about the games, honestly. I remember enjoying them, I remember liking them, but I don't remember the bosses. So as I've been thinking about my favorite boss fights out of the whole entire franchise, I actually looked them all up from all the games I've played, so I didn't miss any. And I've come up with 5. My top 5 out of the whole Zelda franchise. And this is not including final bosses, but this is kind of like mini bosses slash dungeon bosses, mostly dungeon bosses, but I think 1 or 2 of them could be kind of considered mini bosses. But when I think about what makes me remember a boss fight is super epic music, really cool mechanics, unique, kind of innovative ideas. I mean, how many Gomas have we fought now? So many Gomas. There's always a Goma, there's always a dragon, there's always uh some sort of like sand creature or something. Although I will say I was very surprised by a reveal in Echoes of Wisdom that I just recently played. That one took me completely by surprise. I thought I knew what it was and I was wrong. So these are my top 5 Zelda bosses of all time, not including final bosses. There will be spoilers. I will be talking about the fights and the battle systems and all that stuff. So if you have not experienced all the boss fights in the Zelda franchise, just be warned, there are spoilers. I tried to put this list in order. I'm going to do my best to kind of start with like the bottom and work my way up to the top. So starting with number 5. Number 5 for me is going to be Miragia. Miragia from Tears of the Kingdom. Miragia to me was such a cool boss fight, but it was kind of also slightly disappointing because it was so short. You fly around on a Zonai device and launch Unobo at these giant magma dragons that have come out of Death Mountain, but each one only takes 1 hit and there are 3 of them. And so when you get all 3 of them, that's it. It's done. The boss fight's over. So I guess you could kind of consider that a mini boss, but the whole idea of that fight was so cool. I loved it. The music was great. The flying around was great. I just thought that fight was so, so cool. And I thought it was kind of a missed opportunity because it was so short. And I was hoping they would build on that. I was fully expecting to go down into the Fire Temple, which is a whole different discussion topic because that was my least favorite temple out of Tears of the Kingdom. I was fully expecting to build on that once we made it down into the temple, and they didn't. They had a completely different boss that was actually really easy, and I feel like that was a missed opportunity. So number 5 is Miragia. I'm going to say number 4 is Colgera from Tears of the Kingdom. Now, some of you may disagree with me. These are all just Susie Grace's opinions. Colgera was not a challenging fight. The reason I loved it was kind of everything all together. It was the fact that he had some of the best music out of the entire Zelda franchise. I think we can all agree on that. And he had a really cool design. You fought him up in the air the whole time, and you dove through his body to hurt him. And that was so cool. I had never seen that before. That was a really cool, innovative kind of mechanic. And I loved that. I thought that was amazing. I sought Colgera out everywhere I could because I just loved that battle. It was just a lot of fun for me and I really enjoyed it. Number 3 is Master Koga. Master Koga wasn't necessarily super, super innovative, but they made each battle really interesting because he used different Zonai devices and like weird wackadoo kind of put together Zonai devices each time you met him. The music was fantastic and he's hilarious. And I loved what they did with the Yiga clan down in the depths. And I just loved his character. And I know he's a bad guy and I know he was basically doing all the wrong things, but man, he was so much fun to fight and he just made me laugh. I just cracked up during all the fights and all the scenes with him. I just totally cracked up. And then after you fight him multiple times throughout the depths, the final time you fight him, he busts out this massive Zonai construct of his own, and you have to fight him with that. I just loved Master Koga. I thought he was great. Maybe he's technically considered a mini boss. I don't know. But I just found fighting him to be delightful. It was great. I loved it. Number 2 is Koloktos from Skyward Sword. Now, Skyward Sword is interesting because it has one of my favorite bosses out of the whole franchise, and it has what is easily one of the worst designed bosses out of the entire franchise. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. Another interesting thing about Skyward Sword is they recycled so many bosses. Their boss design was so weird because there are multiple bosses that you fight multiple times. We're talking up to 3 times. And yeah, they get a little bit harder each time you fight them, but I just found that to be so frustrating and such another missed opportunity. So Skyward Sword is kind of interesting, but it did give us Koloktos. Koloktos is a wild fight. First, Koloktos starts out as this automaton that's in the ground, and it has these big arms that like have knives on them and all sorts of crazy things. And using your whip, you have to rip the arms off of this automaton and you have to hit its heart. But then phase 2 of the fight, it pushes itself up out of the ground and then it pulls these massive swords out from behind it. And the only way you can hit it is to rip its arms off and then take its own swords, chop its legs off, and then hack and slash at its metallic like insides or heart. That was just, it was brilliant. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. It gave me such a rush. It was just a really epic fight. And it made things even better that the entire soundtrack of Skyward Sword was fully orchestrated. So not only was the boss fight epic, but the music was fully orchestrated. And it was really, really cool. Really cool fight. Overall, awesome. I loved it. I thought it was great. Kind of strange that you can have such a cool boss in a game with also such a terrible boss and so many recycled bosses. It was very strange to me, but whatever the case, I loved Koloktos. I know a lot of you are probably going to disagree with me on this one. Maybe not. I don't know. Everybody has their own opinions, and that's fine. But the number 1 boss fight that I personally, Susie Grace personally loves is Star-Lord from Arbiter's Grounds in Twilight Princess. And I know what you're thinking. But then you had to use that spinner that they gave you in that dungeon that you literally never used again, except maybe one time in Hyrule Castle. Or if you wanted to get rupees out in Hyrule Field. That was pretty much all the spinner was good for. But the boss fight with Star-Lord was nothing short of brilliant, in my opinion. The first part of the fight is, here's this massive skeleton creature that's half in and out of this pit of sand. And your job is to jump on your spinner and you have to bounce from the walls to his vertebrae and crack his vertebrae so he sinks down into the sand. They're like little sand soldiers that like pop up out of the sand and block your way. So it does take a little bit of maneuvering to make that happen. But after that, all the sand drains out. You use the spinner once again to raise this big giant pillar, but Star-Lord isn't finished with you. And he comes back to life and he's this big floating head. And then in order for you to beat him, you literally have to hop back and forth from wall to wall as like spiky things are coming around your way on your little spinner track. And he's shooting fireballs at you. And then when you finally do knock him out of the air with your spinner, they play this again. Which is one of my favorite Zelda details. And it just feels so heroic and so cool. And he's massive and he makes these crazy sounds when you hit him. And the whole boss fight, it's my favorite boss battle, non-final boss battle out of the entire franchise. Star-Lord has my heart. It was such a fun fight and it was so imaginative and so unique and it stood out to me and I just loved it. Those are my top 5. Now, 2 honorable mentions. Fights that I didn't necessarily love, but were very unique and stood out to me and I thought were very different and interesting. Armogoma from Twilight Princess. Armagoma is your quintessential big giant spider with an eyeball in the middle of her body. And she climbs up on the ceiling and she's hard to reach and you got to get her to fall. But in Twilight Princess, you get her to fall underneath these big giant statues, but then you use your rod, which can control the statue, and you bring this giant smashing fist down literally on the middle of the spider. Absolutely fantastic. That was great. It was kind of a boring fight, but that was just kind of a unique thing that stood out to me. The second honorable mention, I think, would be Bongo Bongo from Ocarina of Time. Bongo Bongo makes zero sense. I don't understand. He is the boss for the Ocarina of Time Shadow Temple, and he's literally playing on a big giant drum while you are also on the drum. But what's interesting about that fight, as if that's not interesting enough, is you can't see him unless you have this lens of truth equipped. So he looks like two big giant hands, but when you equip the lens of truth, suddenly you see his body and you're able to attack his body when the timing is right. So wasn't my favorite fight, but it did stand out to me as one that was very unique and very memorable. You guys probably have different opinions than me. And I love that. I would love to hear what your top 5 bosses are or your favorite boss. Maybe you just have one favorite. I don't know. I would really love to know what your favorite bosses are. These top 5 really, really stuck with me. Hopefully, we get more Zelda games that have cool boss fights in them like that. And I can add to my top 5 or maybe replace some out of my top 5. But for now, those are my top 5. So thanks for watching.